And next up, we have Rupert Read, who is one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, is part of the Green Party in the UK, and as a professor who's written and thought deeply about many of the challenges we face, and specifically has written a book, Parents for a Future, identifying, and I'll let Rupert speak more eloquently and more articulately to this, but that we talked earlier about cultural abundance, and one category, so to speak, that could really unite so many across all categories is parents. And so with that, want to warmly welcome Rupert. Rupert, welcome. Great to see you.
Well, thanks, Elliot, and pleasure to be here in distinguished company, seeking to tackle these very, very important questions. So, given that you've forgone a question session on the last session, we're on time, which is great. So what I intend to do, if that's all right with people, is to speak for really quite a short amount of time, because this is going to be my only visit, unfortunately, to this event. I'm going to speak for quite a short amount of time, and then there will definitely be some time for some questions and discussion in response to what I have to say. My understanding is we have 20 minutes in total here, Elliot, correct? Yeah. So I'll plunge in and by all means put stuff in the chat, but also please be ready to talk with me after the next several minutes are up. So as Elliot kindly mentioned, what I wanted to talk about essentially was the argument of this book, Parents for a Future, How Loving Our Children Can Prevent Climate Collapse. My view is that while there are clearly many things that need to be done, we need to do everything, basically try everything in a certain sense at this desperate moment in our history. One of the most essential is to really mobilize ourselves as co-parents of the future. So this isn't just about people who are literally biologically parents. I'm not myself. I'm an uncle. And I have, various young people in my life in this way and that. I'm not literally a parent. Of course, most adults are parents. Most adults in the world are parents, or at least become parents at some time in their life. And that's really important, but it's also bigger than that. So just in case anyone's already wondering, thinking, well, yeah, but more and more people are choosing for good reason not to have children. How relevant is this? It's partly about literally being parents. I'll say more about that in a second. But it's partly about this being a task that we need to share as communities and as a civilization. And my passionate belief is that if we do, it could yet be transformative. Why do I think that? Well, here's one way into the question. One of the most crucial things we've seen in recent years, obviously, is the emergence of the Fridays for Future movement. My young friend and colleague, Greta Thunberg et al., storming the world in a certain sense, really, along with Extinction Rebellion and others in and around 2019, and still existing as an important force now. And the reason why this unexpected development was so powerful, I take it, was because everybody's heartstrings were really deeply pulled by seeing our young people, by seeing school children rise up and the chants they made. I mean, I remember being on several Fridays for Future events where the young people were chanting over and over again, "Save our world, save our world." And it's very, very affecting, right? Because what they're doing is that when they say that, is they're basically saying that we are not in a position to do this. We can't save our world for ourselves, at least not yet. We might be able to in the future. But young people, typically they can't even vote. They don't have careers yet. They don't run any countries, etc., etc. All this is obvious. The greatest power they have is what Václav Havel famously calls the power of the powerless. They have the power of voice, and they have the power of mobilizing their vulnerability. And that requires a response from the rest of us. And a very simple way of putting my point is, I don't think that response has been forthcoming yet. I take it that's pretty obvious on the macro level. I mean, some of us obviously have tried to respond. You know, some people involved in Extinction Rebellion and all sorts of other things have been directly or indirectly responding to that kind of plea from our children. But has there been a full response? No, there absolutely hasn't been a response that steps up to the mark. That's self-evident. But nor really has there been an organized response yet, if you see what I mean. So the school climate strikes, the youth strikes for climate, Fridays for Future, primarily a movement of children and young people. What I'm suggesting is there has to be a kind of counterpart movement of older people. And the obvious way to center it is around the concept of us as parents of the future. Now, I promised a few words on literally being parents. The best way into that, I think, is to consider the following point, which I think is tragically now unarguable, that whereas parents historically were able to take care of their children by doing things like ensuring that they were well fed, they got to go to a good school, maybe they invested in their future college fund, whatever. That is no longer the case. Parents still need to do all of that kind of stuff. But there's something else as well, which if it isn't done, is going to mean that that doesn't give children anything even remotely like a guarantee of a decent future, a life to grow up into and have a career, family, whatever of their own potentially. So there's something else, which is that parents and all of us together have to ensure the conditions of possibility for the continued survival and flourishing of their kids. And this is an essentially collective task. And that again kind of concentrates the mind around what I'm suggesting, which is there needs to be some kind of organized movement of parents and adults at large, which is a kind of counterpart to what we saw in the worldwide school climate strikes. So that's essentially the nub of the idea. And if you want a more concrete, logical reason for the idea, well, here it is. Parents often say, the thing that matters to me most in the world is my children and their welfare and their well-being. Well, if they mean that, and I think that it's a reasonable response to those claims to assume good faith, if they mean that, then they need to think long-term. They need to think about the future of their children and not just of their children, because your children don't have a decent future if they have no future to look forward to for their children. And this logic iterates endlessly, right? If we knew that everything was going to be crap by 2100, which is quite a likely scenario as things stand, if we knew that, then we would know that things were not going to go well for our children because they would not be going well for their children, even if our own children got to have a decent life this century. And this logic is undefeatable. It's the central argument at the beginning of the book, Parents for a Future. This is not a comfortable conversation to have with anybody, least of all parents, but there's no way around it. There's no way around it. So that's the situation that we are in. And well, my invitation to parents and aunts and uncles and godparents and guardians and anyone who is willing and able, which needs to mean basically all of us, to step up to their responsibilities as co-parents of the future. The situation that faces parents et al. Is precisely as I've just laid out, and the responsibility is irremovable. And if things go very badly over the next generation or so, which on current trends looks likely, then I'm afraid our children will have quite a direct question for us. And the question will be, well, what did you do while there was still time to do lots of meaningful stuff about it? And all of us need to hear that question now. All of us need to hear that question in our heads and visualize it now. And when we do, it seems to me that we get into the kind of position that I'm describing. We get into the kind of position where it becomes clear that a movement along the lines that I'm envisaging is essential. Now, this could take various forms. It could take the form of traditional activism. There are various other forms that it could take. It could mean parents organizing in a way that feels much less like activism, feels much more like, well, we're just doing what is common sense in response to this novel, unprecedented, scary situation. It will probably take the form increasingly of parents forming and others forming various kinds of sort of support groups to kind of process this. But it's not enough to just process it. That has to eventuate in action. It may well also lead to parents and others getting more involved in all sorts of kind of change in their workplaces, where they live, in their professions, perhaps where they pray. This is what I refer to as the new moderate flank, the natural, obvious successor to the likes of Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, a truly mass movement or movement of movements or formation of action or of activation, as I say, not necessarily anything like activism as we know it. Whichever of these forms it takes, which is not for me to decide, nor any of you for that matter, whichever of these forms this kind of responsiveness takes, it needs to be effective and it needs to be scaled and it needs to be soon. And it's starting to come. Look out, for example, for a tiny organization that's formed in England recently called Mothership. I predict you'll be hearing more about it. This is an organization of mothers who get this and are determined to catalyze it in a way that, as I've been saying, doesn't necessarily look or feel like traditional activism and could therefore involve a lot more people. But it's going to require loads of us to respond and step up in unprecedented ways. And it's going to require the mobilization of a great deal of authentic emotion, of the kind that we saw with Greta, of the kind we saw with Extinction Rebellion. It's going to require a lot more parents, etc., to step into that place of power where the fundamental idea is something like, I'm doing this for my children, because if we don't, then we know where we're headed. And what we need to imagine and what we need to catalyze is untold hundreds of thousands and millions doing that and saying that and speaking to camera. And some of them will probably engage in civil disobedience, and many of them will probably engage in activism. But most of them by far will probably do neither of those things, but they will get serious. They will be serious because there is no alternative. Okay, that's what I wanted to lay out for you. And I would love to hear your response and take questions, etc., for the time we have remaining here.
Feel free to chime in or put your hand up if you did have questions. Rupert, I'll kick things off. So yeah, with your experience, actually, we'll give it to Donna since she's put her hand up. Go ahead, Donna.
That's okay. Just always great when people start to engage, and appreciate you looking for that engagement, Rupert. And I really like what you're describing in terms of that word of mobilization. I put something in the chat.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there.
Yeah, and I think it's just a recognition that this is a job for all of us. And we all know, and we talk and we moan and complain about the division and the polarization in our world, which we all do observe, and often not recognizing even the ways that we ourselves feed that polarization and the binary ways of looking at things and thinking. And it kind of relates also to what Forrest has already shared earlier, in terms of, you know, the fact that no one of us can see the whole. We sometimes talk in more sophisticated terms around fractals and prisms and kaleidoscopes and different ways of seeing the world. which has reached an order of complexity that no one of us can truly grasp, even those of us that think we've got a little bit more of it. And so that is why, we are really advocating and working with people everywhere in the world around just let's embrace the ordinary citizen. We are all at some level ordinary citizens. Time to level the playing field and get out of our echo chambers and our platforms, and a lot of reframing. So it's just embracing the kind of reframing that you're suggesting, and staying open to all kinds of ways of bridging divides, because we've got to do that. We need everybody in this. Nearly 8 billion people on planet Earth. The folks in this room or any of the other rooms that we're showing up, we're not going to be able to do this alone. So, and that is aligned with what the mission of global unity is about. I'll stop there. I'm often I joke about. I'm the and lady. I've always got, my sentences are never finished and I'm always going and, but my real hope is that it opens the door for others to add their perspectives as well. Really appreciate what you've shared. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. Well, I really like what you've just said there. And yeah, obviously, Elliot and I have talked about this in the past. The bit of what you've said I'd like to pick up on is the bit about going beyond polarization. I think that's absolutely crucial. It's incredibly difficult. It's central to the objectives of the Moderate Flank initiative. And it's sort of written in, right, to this idea around parents. It's like, here's a kind of deep identity that most of us have in common. And as I say, it applies even if you don't literally have biological children, as I don't. And this is a way that we can potentially reach out and join people together across generational divides, but even more significantly across political divides. And it has to be done. It has to be that way. And that's another reason why I think we need to look beyond the frame of traditional activism. We need to get parents to think, look, this is about something really, really fundamental and visceral that vast numbers of people share in common. What if we were to act on the basis of that? That would have an incredible, incredible power. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate Donna's comment on the need to kind of coalesce different movements. And I think, and Forrest spoke to that towards the end around, how do we coordinate across these different efforts. And so see how we're basically shy on time. So Eric, if you had a quick comment for Rupert, please go ahead. Otherwise, we're going to move to
Tyler. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, just very quickly, this will be. I was watching something recently. Bjorn Lomborg was talking about this notion of like sexy looking solutions, right? And we're very attracted to that. And one of many examples he gave was electric cars, right? Like, rather than providing electric cars to rich people in rich countries, instead of that, providing electric mopeds to poor people in poor countries would have a far, far, far greater impact at a fraction of the cost. But it's not sexy, right? And it doesn't get, the Hollywood stars on board and all of that kind of thing. And so I just wondered what thoughts you had on this sort of virtue signaling, the desire to virtue signal actually obfuscating much simpler, much more basic, much more effective, much more cost effective, above all, possibilities.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm not a fan of Lomborg generally, but I think the point he makes here is not a bad one. I think that it's very true that there is too much hype around things like electric cars. Electric vehicles are obviously part of the solution, but if we fantasize that we're going to replace the automobiles we currently have one-on-one with electric cars, that's absolutely catastrophic for the planet. We need to be thinking much more about shared electric vehicles, also about other, so you mentioned electric mopeds. I would say in significant parts of the global north, electric bikes is actually the single most important thing here. You know, a lot of people could literally, especially in urban and peri-urban areas, literally replace their cars with electric bikes, with just the occasional kind of shared journey in a shared electric vehicle. You know, that's a more sort of transformative move of the kind that we need to be thinking about. And if we're thinking about kind of how we're going to co-parent the future, how we're going to transform in the way that we need to be ready to make those kinds of quite bold mental shifts, and we need to act on them.
Absolutely. And great transition for us as we start looking at very direct solutions and specifically eco-focused solutions. And so again, there's so much richness in what our speakers are sharing. It would be wonderful to have more time to just have broader discussions. So I look forward to next year when we can do this in person, or at least with a lot more space. Thank you so much, Rupert. Really appreciate what you're doing and being here. And Rupert shared a few links, as did Forrest. Forrest shared a link. I'm just going to repost on his ephemeral group process. And Rupert shared a few. We'll repost in a moment as well for his moderateflank.org and parentsforfuture.org.